Do you mind if I did the housekeeping remarks, Jim?
Oh, okay.
Let's see. That's just the like, please leave yourself on mute. Oh, wait. I was looking for my script, but I don't see it. Okay.
Chris, if you want to start with roll call, I can pull up the
I found the
script.
template. It's like the chat. It's what we normally put in the chat. I don't know if it's the same as the script, but I think it's really close. So I'm just gonna read it. I think this is it. So welcome everyone, committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Homelessness Prevention, the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission, Homelessness Prevention Funds Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We're using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raised hand feature. To use the raised hand feature by phone, dial *9 on your phone's dial pad to raise your hand, and use the same combination *9 to lower your hand. Please use this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. All Legal Services Trust Fund Commission committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. And a friendly reminder that this is a video conference and to please be aware of your surroundings behind you. All right. And then Jim will do roll call. So Meeker.
Here.
Aflagi is traveling. Alsaroff. Absent. Iskin. I couldn't hear you, Eric, but I saw you, so.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Very good. Mahoney.
Here.
Rhinus.
Here.
Savage.
Say here, Kim.
I think I saw Kim. Oh, I see you, Kim. All right. We can't hear you, though.
Christian and I are both here. The S's are here.
Okay. And then, yeah, Schreiber. Okay. Wonderful. And then we do have quorum, Jim, and I'll do roll call for our liaisons. Selena Copeland.
Lauren Klein.
Or Lauren Klein. Hi, Lauren. Thank you. Bonnie Huff.
Melanie Snyder.
Hi, Melanie.
Council.
Good to see you. And we know Bonnie will be joining soon. And then for State Bar staff, do we have Dwan yet? Nope, she will be joining us in just a moment though. Chris McConkey is me, Danielle McRae.
Here.
Shannon Crossley, I think Shannon is out today. Brady Dewar is on call. And then we also have Jennifer Zelnick. And then those are the only staff members that I actually see, but I think we have some other staff members who are probably listening as like attendees. Jennifer is one of our newest staff members in the Office of Access and Inclusion. She's a senior program analyst. Jennifer, I hope it's okay if I just like introduce you. Okay, and she's taking the minutes today. Jim, we have quorum.
Okay, good. So I guess next call for public comment.
There are no members of the public.
Oh, no members of the comment. Okay, then
Thank you, Kim.
we'll move on to item 3, approval of the minutes for the July 20th, 2022 meeting. Any comments, corrections, changes?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay.
So I have Schreiber moves and Mahoney seconds. I'll take the vote. Meeker.
Yes.
Aflagi is absent. Alsaroff is still absent. Iskin.
Abstain. I wasn't there.
Mahoney.
Yes.
Rhinus.
Yes.
Savage.
Yes.
Schreiber.
Yes.
Thank you, Christian. Absent. Absent. And just to make sure, Amin still hasn't joined, right? Okay, great. Thank you, Jim. Motion passes.
Great. Great. That brings us to item 4. And I think, Chris, you're doing the presentation.
I do. Let me pull up my slides. And hi, Dwan. Thanks for joining. Yeah. Sorry, screen share always takes me a moment. Okay, can you see the slides? Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. To the Homelessness Prevention Funds Committee meeting to discuss the request for proposals, including scoring rubric for the 2023-2024, aka HP, Homelessness Prevention is HP 4 competitive grants. The slide deck is going to cover with a couple slides on the sort of like statutory background for the HP4 awards. It was Senate Bill SB 154 in earlier materials that we posted. Now, the most recent pending legislation that will influence the HP4 grants is Assembly Bill 179. So I'm going to talk about AB 179 and how it's different than SB 154. SB 154 was the actual Budget Act of 2022 that passed earlier this summer. I'm talking about the grant making timeline, staff's proposed rubric, staff's proposed application questions and reporting questions. And the rubric, the application, the reporting questions are very similar to those for HP 2 and 3. And then staff has a proposed resolution. So Senate Bill 154, which was the Budget Act of 2022 earlier this summer, and Assembly Bill AB 179, which proposes amendments to the Budget Act, would both allocate $30 million in state funds for homelessness prevention, legal services. So this is like already the budget that passed earlier this summer is the $30 million for what can be the HP4 grants. Like other homelessness prevention grants, eligibility is limited to current qualified legal services projects and support centers. Unlike previous HP grants, HP4 is limited to competitive awards. So there's no formula award this time. Up to 5%, no more than 5%, which would be a maximum of $1,500,000 would be available for administrative costs of the State Bar of California and the Judicial Council of California. If any administrative set aside is left over at the end of the grant period, it goes back to grants for QLSPs and support centers. I think the Budget Act says in a manner prescribed by the commission. So it could be IELTA formula or something else, but it would be something, we'd only know what that amount was at the end of the award period. Statutory preference for HP4 grants overlaps with that for HP3 in one respect and is distinct in one respect. The overlap is like HP3, HP4 has a statutory preference for serving rural and underserved communities. Unlike previous HP grants, it's very likely, and that was in Senate Bill 154, that was in the Budget Act that passed earlier this summer. We know that that's going to remain, almost certainly remain a statutory preference. There is no pending though, unless I checked yesterday to make sure it was still pending, unless it like passed today or something. In AB 179, an additional statutory preference. So this would get added. It would be serve rural or underserved communities or partnered with or subgranting to community-based organizations or local jurisdictions. And then the caveat is those partnerships or subgrants must be in effect as of June 30th of 2022.
Hey, Chris, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I always wondered about this underserved communities criterion. Does the statute have any kind of clarification of what the legislature had in mind by those terms, by that term?
So I have one inkling, and then I'm going to actually ask if Dwan or Lauren can confirm this or elaborate. My one inkling, it's a foggy memory, was that for HP2 competitive awards, there was a statutory preference for serving it was either for serving undocumented Californians or for projects that would serve, I know what it was serve Californians regardless of immigration status. And then with HP3, because it was using federal dollars, underserved was slotted in as a substitute with the hope that that would still privilege those projects, but without the call out to immigration status. And then the legislature just kept it for HP4. Now, Juan or Lauren, if that's wrong or there's more to it, by all means.
Yeah, I mean, that's my recollection too, that underserved, it was before for undocumented immigrants, but they didn't want to explicitly say that. So that now it's obviously the underserved is a broader category, but that was the intent originally.
Okay,
I guess they could have, maybe they could have gone back to it because HP4 would use state dollars again, unlike HP3, but they kept it.
Yeah, and they've, I know for the commissioners are on other kind of discretionary grants, this has been adopted, this rural and underserved language, for several other grants as well. So they really have taken to this language, the legislation.
I mean, rural, I get. I think there's a pretty clear definition of that. Underserved, I've really never understood because I don't really know who isn't underserved amongst our population.
Yeah,
It's pretty vague in the RFP too. It kind of says something like that the applicant can describe anything that would sort of like create an even higher barrier to accessing civil justice than would their statutory indigency already, like generally, because all of the clients are supposed to meet the definition of indigent. It's like an extra layer, but it's a very easy thing to establish, I think.
Okay.
So the HP4 grants have more or less the same language for all practical purposes, the same language as HP3 and its permissible uses. The only change was the legislature added a comma. The comma after advice. So it says, including pre-eviction, eviction, legal services, counseling, advice, comma. There was no comma before. So for all practical purposes, it's the same scope of permissible activities. I think you're all already familiar with it, but I wanted to put it up again since it's, it may have been a while since you've seen the language, but essentially it's an emphasis here on housing law, income maintenance work, public benefits law. For the HP3, they added, and then for HP4, they kept the explicit authorization to do some work with domestic violence survivors, foreclosure prevention, and that has the catch-all at the end for just homelessness prevention activities generally, legal services generally. Is foreclosure prevention? Oh, it's up here in the first bullet point. I thought it was itemized as its own bullet point, but it's up here. Okay. So the approved timeline, the commission adopted this timeline on the 12th with the caveat that there are approximate dates that can move as necessary to accommodate commissioner, staff, and program needs. Like if for some compelling need to give the applicants one more day or something to submit their applications, like this timeline allows for those sorts of things. I just wanted to flag that the next two meetings for this committee on the approved timeline were October 19th and December 1st. And already we know that October 19th is probably going to have to change due to OA&I staff availability that day. And so I emailed the whole committee to see if maybe October 20th would work. And from what I heard from the majority of commissioners was October 20th could work. So we might confirm the 20th, but shoot me an email today if you didn't already to tell me if that's a problem. And then December 1st is the October 19th or 20th meeting would be when the committee advises the scoring team by applying the rubric to a subset of applications. And then the 1st is when the committee will meet to recommend awards to the commission. Okay, so kind of shifting gears to the rubric. So staff recommends that the committee and the commission delegated authority to the committee on August 12th to adopt to create the RFP, including the scoring rubric. So staff's recommendation to the committee is that it do the same thing that it did for HP3, which is use the rubric as a tool to guide evaluation of all the applications, and to tell the applicants that scores would not guarantee funding, rather, the committee and the commission could still exercise discretion to make awards that best accomplish the goals of the funding statute. And there's sort of two ways that staff always thinks about where this might come up. There are probably other ways, but one would be if the highest scoring proposals were all going to serve Southern California and there was no one in Northern California or no one on the Central Coast or despite the rural preference, there was almost no rural projects. And then another one is if there was an intervention missing, maybe it was work with domestic violence survivors or foreclosure prevention or something. Kim. And Kim, you're on mute.
So when I was reading the narrative, I thought that there needed to be more transparency and not just indicate accomplishing statewide goals. That's a little, I think that's a little too vague, particularly when what you're telling the applicants are, someone may get it, some program may get an award with fewer points. So I would be more comfortable if the narrative was more explicit in indicating the importance of demographics and the intervention, just as you said. I just find that broad language about meeting statewide goals. If I'm an applicant and I'm 5 points ahead of another program, I really want to know why and not just that broad statement.
Great, thank you, Kim. And this is in the way this would appear for everyone else in the RFP is it like would appear right above the rubric. I think it's like the caveat at the top is that your score doesn't guarantee funding.
Yeah, I had written down the page number in case people want to look at it, but of course, at the moment, it flew off my desk.
If staff had
it's page 3 of the selection criteria.
Oh, thank you, Kim. And I think staff had probably picked the broad statement. This goes back to HP3. We had it for HP3 in order to like I'll just be frank, to maximize the commission, the committee's like latitude to come up with a reason to allow itself to have a rationale like after the fact that it couldn't think of before, because we were able to think of geographic spread of dollars and projects, and we were able to think of like diversity of interventions up front, but we're like, what if there's a reason we can't think of where
sorry.
Yeah. Oh no. So we had that broad statement, but maybe it needs to be more. Maybe it needs to be a little less vague.
Okay. So to protect the staff and give them some flexibility, maybe you could use the 2 things you just articulated to us as examples. I just think it comes across as kind of hiding the ball, which, could make staff feel uncomfortable. But I think if you, for example, and list those 2 things. Anyway, it
Right.
Sounds picky, but I'm just putting myself in the place of a applicant who's basically not happy that they didn't get it. And what does that broad phrase mean? So I'm done.
No, that's great, Kim. This is like our only agenda item today. So talk about
Okay.
the RFP. So
Okay.
Yeah, this is your chance.
Yeah, no, I know you need wiggle room and I think you should have wiggle room.
Christian.
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's sort of inevitable, right? That these scores are gonna result in exactly the scenario that Kim is describing, which is, why didn't I get picked for the team? So, I mean, we definitely need something to account for the wiggle room.
And I think with HP3, the scoring team, committee, and commission did not end up. I could be misremembering, but I'm like 90+% sure that they did not end up skipping over anyone to get funding. But this did actually come up with Cal HFA grants, I think, where there was, Danielle, raise your hand. Do you want to describe that? There was a concentration in LA or something like that.
So I was just raising my hand to confirm what you just said. That's also my recollection for HP3. we were able to, or the factors played out such that all of the projects that received funding for HP3 competitive grants were from the top of the list kind of down if you sort them by points. But Cal HFA, for geographic reasons, that was not the case. There was projects, for example, that would serve San Bernardino and Riverside counties, and they would otherwise not be served. And then I think the other area was San Diego, would otherwise not be served had we not deviated strictly from the scoring rubric point spread, if you will. But that was not the case for HP3, like Chris said.
Thank you, Danielle. So it can happen. And thank you for confirming that it didn't happen with HP3. I couldn't quite remember. Okay, thank you, Kim. I think just making sure that's in the RFP is really easy. That's easy to do. My last bullet point here is just that does, if that wasn't obvious, that entails a post-scoring analysis. Like once you see like where the highest scoring proposals are all situated, only then would you realize, oh my gosh, they're all in LA or something. It's an extreme example, but it's an analysis that happens after the scoring process. Okay. So this slide, we always, every time we have ask a committee to adopt a scoring rubric, we always put it on the slide and it always looks monstrous. It's just a lot of text, but I'll do my best to just kind of walk you through the major features. So we seek to keep our scoring rubric. Staff always proposes rubrics that are as close as possible to those for, while incorporating any refinements over time, are otherwise as close as possible to the rubrics that other grants are using, because the applicants start to understand them more and more over time. And there's like a body of technical assistance that starts to develop for them. So we try and avoid unnecessary changes. So this one looks really similar to HP3. I highlighted in yellow the major changes I'm going to talk about, but before I talk about the highlighted language, I'll just say that the overall structure is the same as HP3, including the spread of points. So most of our scoring rubrics now use exceeds expectations, meets or below expectations, and not addressed columns. This particular spread of points was one that the HP Funds Committee actually tinkered with last summer. The committee last August for HP3 moved points between out of project impact and strategies and into like administration, for instance. So you can do that, but otherwise this is the same. We usually have project impact and strategies as a row. This definition hasn't changed. Administration is usually its own row. We used to call it organizational capacity. So for consistency across grants, I updated it to administration, but the language after the colon is the same. And then I'm skipping a couple rows. Project evaluation is the same. And we usually always have a special consideration row at the bottom. Kind of depends on the grant. But for HP grants, this is one place the committee has in the past put in legislative preferences. So serves rural and serves underserved populations are their own rows. Other competitive rubrics for other commission grants also have those as their own rows. Those did originate with statutory preference language. For HP3, the special consideration was, it's the part that is not highlighted in yellow. It's like proposes evidence-based advocacy strategies. And that was because we knew that for HP3 dollars, which were federal state fiscal recovery funds, pandemic recovery funds, that Congress and the US Treasury was preferring projects that had a basis had an efficacy with a basis in evidence. So we built that into the special consideration row, and how that looks for legal aid is full scope representation in eviction cases. So that federal preference does not attach to HP4, but staff left it in the special consideration row, sort of like for sort of like stare decisis or precedent. We can take it out, but it was there before. It kind of worked. Programs got kind of accepted that that was of public policy value, sort of like evidence-based interventions and full scope representations. If you want to keep it, it's there. The three changes, now the parts that are highlighted in yellow. Okay, so I'm going to actually take hands as soon as I see them. So Eric.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. I'll start with project evaluation. Are we going to incorporate? Oh no, never mind. Sorry, forget it. On administration, I mean, are we going to incorporate the history of the project in, like we talked about at the commission meeting, I think, in meeting its deadlines and in meeting its goals?
Yes. So it's not written in the Scrum rubric itself, but it's in the guidance for that row of the rubric and the RFP. I can't remember quite how we worded it, but in the one paragraph explaining it, I think the end of it says, and is sort of like timeliness of submissions, including reports for other grants, is like relevant to this criterion or something.
So staff will flag that, I presume, if there has been a non-compliance. Is that right?
Yeah, I think your staff members who attend the scoring team meetings it would be on them to flag it. They would
Okay.
have to come to the meeting with that information. Yeah.
And I guess the other things, I'll try to be brief, are, again, I just repeating my concern about underserved. It's a separate line. It's worth 15 points. And I'm still struggling to understand why anybody wouldn't deserve that. But maybe somebody can provide an example of what would be a project that would truly warrant 15 points for serving an underserved population. So that's a question there. And then on the evidence-based advocacy strategies, I also don't really understand that one. You know, I mean, you gave one example, but you know what, I'm not sure what that means. I don't know what that means.
So I'll just quickly, the one example I gave is the one example that I know about. So I'm gonna be like transparent with you. Full scope representation in eviction cases is the only advocacy strategy with whose efficacy has a basis in like reliable studies. So maybe if like Lauren or Bonnie know of others, but I'm just gonna say like, so if that was just something we had to have for HP3, but it's just a little bit too unique or like too niche for this grant, I'll just flag that one example is the only one I know of. And then really quickly for the serves underserved, the way that the scoring team ended up sort of handling that row last year for HP3 was, and I need to be careful because my memory is a little foggy on this, but I think the more dimensions of underserved they articulated. So if it was like, there was a project that pitched services to foster youth, for instance, and they went out of their way to articulate both how youth and the foster care system creates like multiple tiers of like disadvantage in accessing civil justice, the more likely they could score points. It was a very holistic analysis, so it did get down to like how detailed and persuasively they described the needs of the underserved population and what they were going to do about it. But that's all I can really remember. So I don't know if like Jim or Danielle or Dwan has a better memory of how we handled that one, but it was very holistic. And then I see that Lauren, Bonnie, and Christian all raised their hands. And so I think it was in that order.
I was just going to make a comment or ask a follow-up question about the evidence-based advocacy strategies. I don't know of other evidence-based strategies that legal aid programs would have any familiarity with, enough so to propose some kind of a unique strategy. So if we leave that in, my question is, does that mean that we are in effect giving preference to organizations that propose a project that provides full scope representation as opposed to one that does not? And if that's the case, is that something I would just ask the commissioners to consider whether that's what we want to do, seeing as that's no longer a statutory requirement. I was also just going to comment on the special consideration piece, but I can do that at a later point in the discussion, if that would be better, Chris.
I was just going to back up your first thing with Lauren and say that I think it would end up giving preference if we kept it to projects that would offer full scope representation for better or for worse, whether that was actually something we wanted. I think that's how it would play out.
Okay.
Yeah. Why don't we go to Christian, Kim, and then Jim, and then we'll come back around to you, Lauren, if you want to leave your hand up. Okay.
But I think Bonnie was next, Chris in the queue.
Oh, great, Bonnie.
Yeah, sorry, and I'm going to dash off again, but I'll be back. Yeah, the only evidence-based practice is in this field is full scope representation in UD cases. So I'll just, in terms of the evaluation, we did a lot of work to try to identify that when the feds made that a requirement. And that is the only one that they have accepted as meeting their definition of evidence-based. There's a lot of evidence for a lot of other things, but just when you're using that term. So just want to give you a heads up on that.
If the committee decides to remove it without adding something else in its place, the only thing that would be left would be the partnerships and subgrants that exist on or before June 30th of 2022. So that maybe that first one, the evidence-based advocacy, isn't the right one to keep, but if you want there to be multiple ways to get special consideration points, you might want to put something there. So something to think about. Was Christian, I think you might be next.
Yeah, and I might just be anticipating Jim Meeker's comments here, but my recollection was, to Bonnie's point, was that there was federal language, and I thought it was for Shriver grants actually, that was evidence-based, and that was a federal requirement for some of these grantees. And we imported that into the prior HP rubric because they were accessing federal money and it was required for that. We had a sort of a lengthy discussion about what that entailed. So it was somewhat anticipatory, is my recollection, because we thought that grantees were going to have to do it anyway. So we were sort of putting that on them to include in this if they could. I don't know that I understood then, or at least I don't recall it being quite so limited as full scope representation, but hearing Bonnie say that now suggests to me that if our grantees are not going to be full scope, then, and we don't consider that to be an important consideration, I would take out that provision.
Jim, thank you, Christian.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not so sure we should have that in there since it's not federal monies and we don't have to follow the federal guidelines on this. My only other question is, and I have not read the statute, but whether or not the issue of the leveraging of partnerships, they were pretty clear that should be already established partnerships. Why is the partnership issue any less important than the underserved and the rural population and the evaluation?
Oh, you mean like why is it, we have a special consideration instead of like, the great question. I think procedurally, process-wise, how it ended up in special consideration is it got added after the Budget Act passed, SB 154. We only kind of found out about it about I don't know, maybe like a week or a week and a half ago. So we slotted it into special consideration. It's not necessarily, I'm not speaking for all staff. I don't think it was staff's intention to suggest that it should be weighted less than the other rows. It was it was a last minute public policy kind of development.
And on the underserved, my recollection of HP3, there was also a proposal that was focusing on the Native American Indian community up around just east of the mountains, and the problem of transportation between their different programs and clinics and stuff. So that was to me, at least when scoring him, that was a underserved population, given that it was focused exclusively on poor Native Americans.
Thank you, Jim. Kim? Or Dwan, I saw you raise your hand, Dwan, while Jim was speaking. Did you want to say something to?
And I can wait till after, yeah.
Okay, sorry, Kim.
So, I would take out, based on the discussion so far and what we know on the narrowness of that, I would take that out. I would like to see as a special consideration, the possibility of a project being replicable. And, I know it's this, funding that is going to end, but I do think that that's something that if a program can make a good case as to how this can become a statewide project, or there's statewide tools are developing, to me, that would give bonus points. Like Eric, I have a real problem with the underserved population, despite what Jim has just told us. Based on my own experience, anybody who is a client of one of these programs, they're underserved. So I don't, it's, in a sense, it's almost a throwaway points for the applicant, because they can all make out a pretty strong statement that they're serving people that do not have access. And then I just wanted to comment on the use of the word thoughtful before strategy. I don't know if that's new, but I'm seeing a thoughtful strategy twice in here, and I don't even know what that means.
Thoughtful.
So
I think it is new. When it used to be, I actually didn't describe this change yet, but essentially those two rows used to be focus on rural populations and focus on underserved, and then staff in the memo goes into why we changed it to just serves rural, serves underserved, like it says it in the statute. And then that required us to slightly rewrite the description after the colon. So the word is new. So it wasn't vetted last year. It's like yes, that's the word we want.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. I don't find it very meaningful to have those words in there, but so I mean, I would prefer to have those two, that word removed in both rural and underserved.
So you can just say presents a strategy.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a quick follow-up question. There's so many hands raised, but well, I'm going to pitch the idea, and you can all think about it. Underserved is in the statute as a necessary factor for preference, and is undefined in the statute. It's possible it's very easy to take the partnerships that exist on or before June 30th and make that a row of the rubric where serves underserved currently sits, and instead move serves underserved to be a special consideration, because it's, like Kim said, it lends itself to being more of a quote, like throwaway, like everyone can get those points. And then the partnerships could be its own row, and what could distinguish between a below, meets, and an exceeds for the partnerships is like the length of history, the amount of back and forth, the detail in the proposal that they will partner, or something like that. I just want to pitch that idea. And while you're thinking about that, I'll go to Lauren.
Thanks, Chris. I just wanted to talk briefly about the leveraging partnerships piece. In case it's helpful, I wanted to give just a little bit of background about where that came from. I know it's popping up late in the amendments to the budget bill. This comes from a coalition of legal aid organizations and community-based tenants' rights organizations working together that advocated for this funding. And ultimately, the goal of those advocates was to replicate what is happening in Los Angeles with Stay Housed LA, where legal aid organizations are partnering with other CBOs to do tenant education and outreach. So that was kind of where this came from. The piece about being in effect as of June 30th, I think this is explained in the memo, was a creation of legislative staff. This is not something that advocates were asking for. I think they were trying to ensure that brand new things weren't being created, since this is just 1 year funding. So that's where that came from. But the partnership piece is something that advocates spent a significant amount of time advocating for, because they felt that was important to improve outcomes. And I highlight that just because, kind of as how has already been raised, now if you look at just the pieces that are in the statute, the rural, the underserved, and the partnerships, for rural and underserved, it's a max 40 points compared to just 15 for the partnerships. And that seems somewhat out of balance, especially considering the rural and underserved pieces are carryovers, copied and pasted from prior year's legislation, still important, but the partnership piece is what's new in the statute this year and represents a significant and collaborative amount of advocacy. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear for commissioners.
Thank you, Lauren. And then next, I think is Dwan.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if it'd be helpful for you all, but for me, maybe Chris, if you could pull up the language of the legislation and like Lauren and Chris said, you know, we were only notified of this last week. And so I think how it's, and the version that we actually got was a different version than what went in print over the weekend. So Chris had to like make sure that the memo was in line with what we received last week. So this is really late coming. And so, but I believe though, right, Chris, when you read it to me on the phone, they mush, it used to be 1, 2, and 3, and then now they mushed it together as like one. So I think my recommendation, if that's what, once you pull it up, Chris, then we might want to treat those 3 categories, underserved, rural, and partnerships, the same way, if that's the way it's written. So above the line instead of special consideration. I think somebody had suggested that, maybe it was Kim or Jim, I can't remember now, because that might be then in the most alignment with the statute itself. But I'm just throwing that out there.
I'm just waiting for it to slowly zoom in. Okay, so this is where the so yeah, it's continuing to zoom even after I told it to stop. So this is where the HP4 authorization language begins. So the 30 million shall be distributed, and it's handled in 2 paragraphs. So starting with provision 25, the track. Sorry, I was just scrolling down to make sure it didn't continue. The track change that the legislature has here would be the change to SB 154, which was the original Budget Act of 2022 that passed earlier in the summer. So originally it said, in awarding these grants, skip the blue, preference shall be given to qualified legal aid agencies that serve rural or underserved communities, period. And then that was it. So now if AB 179 passes, it will read, in awarding these grants, in order to enhance the reach of the services provided, preference shall be given to qualified legal aid agencies that serve rural or underserved communities, or to qualified legal aid agencies partnered with or subgranting to community-based organizations or local jurisdictions, provided that the partnerships subgrants were in effect as of June 30th, 2022. This went into print over the weekend, like Dwan said. I actually don't know if, my understanding is it's very likely that this will pass.
Yeah, I think we should work on this under the assumption this is going to pass. This is the.
If necessary, like we could put something in the proposed resolution that says like, well, maybe you want to keep this no matter what, whether it passes or not. But if you didn't, then we could build into the resolution that can be swapped out for something else. But I think all indicators are that this will pass.
So yeah, a previous version that like Lauren and Chris and I all saw had it broken down into, it was just a different ordering, but now they have mushed it together. And what I'm thinking is, if it's together in one clause, it doesn't, the way we designed it gives it a separation. We're scoring it a little bit different, that category under special consideration. I don't know if that's the legislative intent. I don't know if they thought through it that far, but it seems to be like maybe we've taken it one step further than it needs to be.
The only thing I'll add to that is last year, I think there was a discussion about whether rural, because last year they had rural or underserved. Mm-hmm. And there was a moment where it was one row of the rubric. Mm-hmm. Like you could do one or the other. And I think the committee ended up breaking it out because they were worried like, well, everyone will get underserved, so they'll all max out there. And then they won't actually have gotten, the rural folks may not have gotten preference. So we ended up doing 2 rows. And so there's kind of now this like, now we kind of like everything gets its own row. But that's not the way we have to do it.
Oh, but so I guess I'm suggesting it would still get its own row, but it would be 3 rows atop, no special consideration for the partnership.
Oh, there you go.
So not to mush it together in one row, but it would be 3 rows, but not in partnerships. I mean, not in special consideration for the partnerships.
Yep.
I'll go back to the rubric, but I can go back to the bill language if anybody wants. So. And
Chris, is there a way to like redline it as we're going along, like say take out the thoughtful like Kim suggested?
So I can make edits as we talk. The only thing is PowerPoint doesn't do track changes. So I can pull up a Word version of the RFP and do, if we want to see red line, so we can undo them. I'll have to pull it up in Word.
Yeah, why don't you do that? and
Is
then
that
maybe-
best? Okay.
Yeah, why don't we go to Chris then next?
Yeah, so while I'm doing that, yeah, Christian.
Just this is somewhat echoes Lauren's comment, which is just that we actually held Joanne, you may remember this. We held a conference at the kickoff. I think it was HP2, and it was prior to the House LA, the success of that, or it was on the heels, right on the heels of that, and it looked like it was going to be good. And our goal at the time was to really get organizations to think a little bit more broadly than actually just replicating the work that they were already doing, including taking on really big projects. So the idea of partnering with other organizations, to me, is definitely worth rewarding organizations for, especially if the partnership ends up helping them provide a much larger scope of work than what they're doing, on their own and in their existing portfolio of work.
So I'm these are all proposed changes that I've heard. The applicant, let's just get rid of the evidence because I think it's uncontroversial. So right now it'd be the applicant would elaborate partnerships. Rich?
Well, this is sort of for Melanie and Lauren. One of the rules of statutory interpretation is that that words in a statute should be read as having meaning. The words underserved communities, underserved populations, those words have appeared in the statutes numerous times with the obvious implication that would mean all of our clients, when in fact that's probably not the intent. And I'm wondering if Melanie or Lauren can give us some insight as to whether or not that isn't politically correct code for undocumented aliens or immigrants or those who would seek status as immigrants, or is it generally so vague that it encompasses, in fact, all of our clients?
I can give you my perspective from, having advocated at the legislature on this language. I think the reality of the situation is that they copy and paste the language from last year and then go from there to make changes. Last year, the word underserved was used to signal undocumented folks. So that's what it intended then. And I don't believe there was any active consideration of whether that would be taken to mean the same thing this year or not. I think they take last year's language, recycle it, and add on. So that, I think, is the reality of how this language came about, to whatever extent that is helpful in figuring out how to do this rubric.
That's very helpful. Thank you. For me, that answers the question.
And then Jim.
Yeah, I would suggest that basically to get the scoring to add up to 100, that all the categories, the valuation, the underserved, the rural, and the basically working with subgroups, all be weighted at 15 points. And to take off the, because my recollection of, there wasn't a whole lot of variation on the administration that's rated at 20. I mean, that was largely based on their history. And my recollection, most of the grants, came in at the same level. So I would drop that down to 15 points too, and keep the 25 points for the impact in case there's any of these grants have an exceptional impact, that it would score heavily, and that still keeps your 100-point range.
Chris, you're on mute.
Thanks, Danielle. So Danielle's like sitting in like one desk over, so she can hear when I'm trying to talk. Would this become, Jim, 15,
Right.
10, 5?
Right.
like that's here. So essentially admin, serves rural, serves underserved, project eval, and partnerships would all be 15.
It'd all be scored the same
Okay.
except for impact.
I guess I'll like wait a moment before making that in track changes, unless folks want to see how it looks. Okay, I'm just gonna go for it. That's what I would do, Jim, is I would actually just delete this row, because then
Right.
because it just becomes part of this block.
Right.
Except the special consideration you're saying would become part of this block too. So
Right.
yeah. So this would go up here. And there would be no need for a special consideration row, and that would total 100. We'll just call this partnerships. Sorry, let me know if the zoom is like, I tried to make it big enough that everyone could see it, but it's hard to squeeze it in one page. Eric.
Eric, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So under this proposal, administration is now part of serves rural, serves underserved, et cetera.
It's
It would
scored
be
the
its
same
own
way.
row. It would have the same number of points allocated to
Same
each.
weight,
Is there something above administration?
impact.
All right, and that gets more.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get back to, I wanted to ask Rich a question. Rich, you said that Lauren's comment answered the question. How did it answer the question?
We've raised the question a whole bunch of times over the last few years as to what that means. It has a specific meaning. The specific meaning is you should get credit for reaching the maximum here if you specifically point out that the work you're going to undertake with the funds from this grant are directed in part or in total at assisting illegal immigrants.
But I don't.
Undocumented.
I
To
mean,
me, if I were evaluating these, I would look for that, because the unstated legislative intent is that work occur, that we continue to focus on assisting undocumented folks, but that it is politically incorrect to identify that in legislation.
I guess I'm going to respectfully disagree with that. I mean, I don't see how we can administer this grant based upon unstated secret language.
I can actually confirm that. So what Lauren said, it's not just that LAC heard that, the state bar had heard that same messaging.
Okay, but so are we going to tell then the grantees that that's what this means?
No,
we have said in a webinar, we can't put in print because of the nature of the funding.
I wouldn't put it there, because the reason I directed the question to Lauren and Melanie was specific. They represent our grant recipients. What I heard from them is that it's commonly understood and that we have to be politically sensitive to the needs of the legislators who are enacting these grants for us. We have to be sensitive to their needs. But as relates to our evaluation of applications, it seems to me it's well understood in our community that that's what those words mean. And so that a grant application that highlighted that specifically would be treated differently than one that simply identified the client targets as underserved.
Well, I guess I have a lot of sympathy for the undocumented immigrant population. I'm doing asylum cases, so it's not that I'm unsympathetic to that. I just feel like that's not right. It doesn't seem right to me.
What I would add to the discussion is, while the committee and commission obviously can interpret what the words mean, if the committee decided that, or interpreted underserved to mean something like undocumented or like immigrants' rights issues, everyone who doesn't do immigration law will feel locked out of that row. and 15 points, like they might get a not addressed just because they don't do that area of law or something like that, or maybe below expectations. And what we see in the spread of points is even 5 points can make a huge difference in whether or not someone gets funding.
Right.
So they'll notice, is what I'm saying, if they're like, they feel locked out of a row.
And LSC funded organizations in particular would not be able to get any points in that row.
No, you know, actually, that's really interesting because there was, I think, 1 or 2 LSD programs that, though they couldn't take them on, they had a mechanism for referral. And in those cases, we did give them some points. I can't remember what we gave them, but that wasn't 0.
So what ended up happening with HP3 is we kind of had that understanding in the back of our heads. The scoring team did, and the committee did, I think, when it was discussing the rubric, and left it unsaid. And then in the way the scoring team approached that row was, if it was going to be for this run documented, that was like a shoe in for meets or exceeds, as long as it was a meaningful amount of the work. But then anyone else could come in with like a foster youth or something like that and still get meets and exceeds, and it was, the door was still open to others. But then it does lead to that, I'm just going to call it a slippery slope that Kim was pointing out, where it's like, well, then everyone gets points. You know, it's not hard once you keep the door open to like everything that's underserved. So it's a pros and cons. But Dwan, you still have your hand up.
Yeah, I want to make two points. That like I think it's fine that the commission has discretion. Like, it's very hard to spell out every single thing in a scoring rubric. I think we do what we can, but I think at the end of the day, the legislature, the judicial council, they have a lot of respect for the commission's decision. So I think you're okay in making a judgment call there in terms of, you know, how many points to give to if a project that has a proposal for certain underserved communities. The other thing is just a practical matter. I think that scoring your suggestions, like I am supportive of everything, all the changes right now. The special consideration though, for having been supervised a number of discretionary grants and being on the review team, that sometimes serves as a nice, like, I guess what you call tiebreakers, because sometimes the points do tend to clump in an area, and that gives it some distinguishing factors. So I don't know if you want to kind of think through a little bit more, I have a special consideration, but that would be my one feedback.
I just highlighted what the guidance was in case anyone wanted to read. A lot of this is from HP3. And Tammy.
So last year when we were scoring that, when we were considering underserved, you mentioned the youth group. I think there was another one awarded to one where the recipients had some disabilities. And I mean, my thought, I was trying to look at like the definition under Attorney General or the Secretary of Health and Human Services, where they do define underserved, if we would want to consider something more than, again, just their alien status. I feel like we did last year.
Thank you, Tammy. Yeah, so last year what we had was this criterion asks, I think this is more or less verbatim, this part here, asks how the targeted population faces even higher barriers to accessing civil justice than do indigent people generally. And since rural is its own criterion, this asks about other ways that someone's underserved than that they live in a rural area. And then we added this. This maybe, Danielle, I'm sorry if I misstate this, but I think the executive committee might have added this for CalHFA. It can be defined with respect to categories. It's just kind of giving examples: race, ethnicity, age, LEP status, disability status, veteran status, and immigration status. And it did lead to a lot of folks getting points in this category.
Chris, I was just going to add, the executive committee has not yet approved the RFP and scoring rubric for the consumer debt grants, but this same language is in what is being proposed to the executive committee tomorrow. So that is not to say that the two committees need to end up in the same place or even necessarily start in the same place. But this language, if you're on the executive committee, you will see it and get to discuss it again tomorrow.
The one benefit of having the broad one, like I mentioned earlier, is it kind of let everyone have a bite at the apple. If they could explain in detail and persuasively, like how their strategy would address the very unique needs facing that particularly underserved group. And then the way the points fell was, I think almost everyone got meets or exceeds in that category. So it was a little bit like, great inflation, I guess, so to speak. But it also was responsive to the statute. So there's room for improvement, but it may be functional. That's how the assessment I'd give. Eric.
I mean, it looks like the legislature, I don't know, perhaps they, as Lauren suggests, maybe they really didn't give much consideration to this at all and just cut and pasted some words from last year. I mean, I actually would be more comfortable in going back to making it one line, you know, focuses or serves or whatever verb you want to use, rural or underserved populations. And the way I would administer that is I would focus on rural if they could meet that criterion. And then if they had some really well-defined explanation for serving a distinct underserved community, I would give them points for that. But otherwise, I probably would give very few people exceeds on that metric instead of everyone.
And Jim.
Yeah, I would tend to disagree with you, Eric, on that. I mean, the statute specifically mentions rural. The statute specifically mentions underserved, although they didn't define it. And it also specifically mentions working with partnerships. And I think that gives them all equal weight. I don't think you want to collapse them. And if you collapse rural and special population, then you're overrating working with partnerships. And I don't think that's right.
Jim, if I could respond to that, I think the language we just saw from the statute actually was framed in terms of serves rural or underserved populations, and then separately talked about partnerships. Maybe we can go back to that language and look at it for a minute.
Yeah, let me pull it back up. Oh, it's worse if I highlight it. So it's this part here in awarding these grants. Yeah.
Serve rural or underserved communities. And then I think there's a semicolon there. Was that crossed out? Oh, no. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, rural or underserved communities, or to the partnerships.
Like a 3-item list with no commas. Yeah.
That's right. It seems to me all 3 items should be given equal weight.
I see. Eric, you're saying rural or underserved communities.
Yeah,
like those two things are adjectives for communities. And
exactly.
then, okay.
It's like a mathematical equation where there are parentheses around rural or underserved communities.
Rural or underserved communities
or
dot. Yeah.
Yeah. So doesn't that imply
I think
they're
you
all
can read
equal?
it either way. I mean, I see Eric's point. I do practically speak. I think I agree with Jim that it's in the same sense. I personally think it makes more sense to be 3 separate rows. But I can see how you read it the other way too, Eric. So I don't know.
The other option would be to take, if you didn't want to, Jim's point is it might be better for the carrying out the legislature to have them weighted equally. But if we wanted to keep them separate and not equal, then underserved could become the special consideration row. I'll go back to the rubric. So Dwan, feel free to walk this back as soon as I say it. I think staff's proposal would probably be to keep the 3 separate. I think staff probably would agree. Staff's just right. Obviously, is not the decision maker here, but the staff probably would agree with the rationale of moving partnerships into its own row and not having it be a special consideration row and like seemingly worth less. And keeping them separate, though, would be similar to what the committee did last year. It did work functionally. We were able to ask separate application questions about both of those rows, rural and underserved. So they had to write separate narratives that were responsive to it. And it did though lead to almost everyone getting points in underserved. So it didn't end up being a big decision. Like it wasn't a deciding factor really for any projects. Jim, I think is next.
Oh, sorry. I'll lower that.
Oh, no worries. Then Kim.
Well, I agree with Jim that with the way those ors are placed in the statute that you need to have all three, and they're not. They need to be weighted equally. And then I just had a question on the partnership. What you have below no longer includes where the partnership has been in effect since June 30th, 2022. So
Thank you.
that has to go back
That
in
was
there,
that was a
right?
copy and paste error or
Yeah.
subgrants.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me see.
Okay. And I mean,
thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the partnership idea. I remember I kept pushing it in previous grant applications, and I think it, that the legislature is recognizing, that the partnerships may further sustainability on a project. So I think it's very important.
Just one note on that. The scoring team and the committee are going to need to figure out what must be in effect as of June 30th.
Yeah.
That's probably going to be a case-by-case analysis. I mean, I think it was, I can't remember, it was me and Lauren or me and Selena that had this discussion, but the easy thing, if it's a program that has like an MOU with another partnership, that's easy, right? They're already in partnership. But if they're already just started talking and they're not that far, I mean, I don't know, there's going to be we're going to have more discussion on that, I think, once we see the application and the proposal, but that's not a black and white to me.
So what counts as what constitutes a partnership?
Partnership, yeah, in effect, yeah.
I think the statute uses words like in effect. Yeah.
Yeah, in effect, yeah.
Subgrants might be easier. I would assume there'd be like an agreement for subgrants, but yeah, the partnerships is what throws it. Yeah. Eric.
I guess just to clarify my concerns here, I agree with every one of these categories and the way we're treating them, except for underserved. And my problem is that, and I'm obviously losing this debate, but I'll just articulate my concern, which is that the way it's framed now and presented now, underserved is either, in my opinion, meaningless, or to the extent we're going to interpret that to privilege organizations that serve undocumented, I just think it's wrong. It's my view. I just have trouble supporting the proposal if that will be part of it. But otherwise, I like it.
One, is it correct to say that staff's recommendation would be not to read into the definition of underserved an exclusive focus on services to undocumented Californians? But to do what we did with HP3, which is to kind of let anyone make a good faith pitch.
Yeah, I mean, we still let anyone make a good faith pitch, but
that would be a very persuasive pitch.
If someone, project proposed, are we gonna give it an exceeds because they're serving undocumented? I mean, that's what we were doing before.
No, that would be staff's recommendation anyway. Rich?
Yeah, Chris, is it the guideline that you showed us before, which is sent to the applicants, is that going to be as it's shown here?
This would be, this is the draft RFP. They would see this.
All right. So to Eric's point, in effect, what we've done is we've given them guidance that phrase might be inclusive of the last three lines of this guidance that is highlighted in yellow. Last two lines, or two of the last three. Right? Race, ethnicity, age, limited English proficiency, disability, veteran status, and immigration status. This is like a regulation to a statute.
Yeah, and if the committee,
it can't be an underground regulation.
Yeah, they would see this, and if the committee did narrow its definition for underserved, we would have to update this highlighted language to reflect the narrower scope, I think.
But I don't think we've ever narrowed it. I mean, I think we just made it more explicit. Like it's always been the programs that make a pitch, right? We've never explicitly said you can only get exceeds if you serve undocumented. We've never said that. We've never applied it like that.
And I don't remember if all these projects got funding, but like we've seen some that we're going to focus on folks with mental health issues and stuff, and they were very compelling in this row of the rubric, and maybe got an exceeds instead of a meets or something.
Well, that guidance does address the issue that I'm raising of possibly privileging a category that is not addressed by the legislation, but then it doesn't meet my second concern, which is it just sort of, I mean, who doesn't address these things? But I've already
Yeah.
made that point, so I'll just
I think
shut
that
up.
was Kim's concern too. I think you're not alone. Yeah.
Well, and I think that my response was, you all have discretion to the extent they are framing it, how, how it's really hard to do a rubric that's like, just automatic for everything. There's going to be some judgment calls in it. Danielle?
In case it's helpful, feedback, context, thoughts to include based on both the HP3 scoring rubric process or scoring team process and the Cal HFA scoring process last year. I recall when we were evaluating focus on underserved populations or served underserved populations, I think Chris is right that it was rare that a project did not get any points in that category because it is admittedly broad or vague, but there was certainly variation in how compelling proposals were in describing a specific underserved population rather than saying we will serve. We saw like the acronym BIPOC a lot, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and that in reading it again and again and again became less compelling, less persuasive to the scoring team than a proposal that specifically targeted or was focusing services for, like Jim mentioned, Native Americans in a specific part of the state that for both demographic reasons, language reasons, and geographic reasons were underserved. So I think there is variation that can be borne out in what would get meets, exceeds below. It's hard to know what the variation will look like before the proposals come in, but my recollection was that there was variation there. I think it's fair to say nobody or very few proposals got 0 points, but that rubric category still felt meaningful to me, even if it was a bit vague in its definition.
Thank you, Danielle.
Everybody would probably get meets if they can write, if they have a halfway decent grant writer.
I think that's right. I think the guidance down below says something like you need to explain like your strategy for serving them or something. So if they didn't have a great grant writer and they didn't get into detail, like everyone should get at least meets, but sometimes they don't because it's just not very persuasive or detailed. But like ideally everyone would get a meets or an exceeds, which is the kind of great inflation-y part of it. Dawn?
So sorry, I don't want to say this again. I know this will be the last time, and if you're all not comfortable going this direction, then that's fine. But if we don't have special consideration, the points are going to end up clumping, and there will probably be ties and so forth. One other thing, I know this is going to be radical, but I'm just going to throw it out there. If there's no special consideration, what about making the impact a scaled score instead of categories, like just 0 to 25, and then we can have more variation that way.
Thank you, Dwan. I had forgotten how common ties are, and that special consideration is like the tiebreaker, or it has been in the past. I heartily endorse Dwan's recommendation that if we do lose special consideration, that this be like from 0 to 25 instead of just 4 tiers.
But if no one's taking to that, that's fine too. My feelings won't be hurt.
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, Dwan, I think you're right that, I mean, Jim, you may remember how like for HP3, there was like 7 that all scored 75 or something like that. Like, because I think 75 was like, if you got meets down the, like all the way down, right? And it was their special considerations that kind of like ended up separating them. So just to kind of keep the committee like moving towards consensus, what I'm hearing is I'm hearing a sort of most commissioners who've spoken at least are on board with the idea of breaking out rural, underserved, and partnerships into 3 rows. There's at least 2 commissioners that have questioned that. And then but I'm hearing most commissioners are maybe okay with keeping underserved. At least 2 commissioners have questioned its helpfulness. I do think we need to keep, there needs to be at least one category where they can get a range of points that isn't preset.
Well, the one to do that would be the impact.
That's where I would do it too. I think I think that option that Dwan just described, let's call it option A, is that's one proposal from staff. And then the other proposal that we'll put out there was making underserved the special consideration. It would deprioritize it, and that may be an issue for how the committee wants to interpret the statutory language. But because that's the one that sort of feels like it's like too many points are sitting there because everyone is so close together, that could be one way to have keep special consideration.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that.
I would go with option A, as Chris just described it.
Make project impact strategies 0 to 25.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, that theoretically may be right, but that's going to be really hard. Think about how that's really going to work. You know, aren't you still realistically going to want to try to group projects and essentially into exceeds, meets, and below? When you think about this, I
And
mean,
maybe we could still do that, Eric, like with our, because we meet to calibrate, but then within exceeds, there would just be more variation.
yeah, maybe. Okay.
Well, you
It's impossible. It's hard. It'd be hard.
you could allow the scores to have flexibility and all. I mean, some things like exceeds, the very best grant proposal that you read would get the 25, and you read all others that are good.
Mm-hmm.
They're better than average, but maybe they're not a 25, so you score them a 23 or 22.
Okay.
I mean, you could approach these categories as suggested cut marks with some flexibility for the scorer to add. It's a little bit better than meets expectation, but it's not as good as exceeds. So I'm going to give it a 22.
Okay.
The historical context I'll give here is that this is sort of like what the committee did for the HP2 competitive grants. I don't think we had columns for exceeds, meets, below, not addressed. I think it was every row of the rubric just had like a range, and it worked. But one of the reasons the committee gravitated, and all the other committees did too for their grants, including partnership, was the sense that like it was to avoid the chances of arriving at a different number of points for different projects, because different scoring teams might, like one team would be a 25, the team would be a 20. If the HP Funds Committee does the same thing it did last year, which is one scoring team reads them all, it could avoid that issue. But if the HP Funds Committee decides to have different scoring teams or rotating commissioners or something like that, then it could, that historical reason we moved away from it could resurface a little bit. They're like, well, for one person it was a 20, for someone else it was 25, but they didn't sit on the same reading session, so they didn't have a meeting of the minds.
So do we have any sort of consensus here at all, or are we all at a stalemate?
Kim has a comment.
I was just going to say that at this point, I think somebody, either Jim or Chris, should kind of lay out the remaining issues we're trying to resolve with this. Because I think, we're sort of going back and forth on underserved, and now we're looking at changing the points range. So can you kind of let us know sort of what we need to resolve as we approach 4 p.m. in half an hour?
Jim, do you want me to take a crack at it?
Sure.
Okay, so this would be my attempt at laying those out. So I think I haven't heard any pushback on getting rid of thoughtful or thoughtful. So let's say those are gone. I haven't heard anyone protest loudly that partnerships should be its own row. So that's now in. I'm just saying, like, I think that that's kind of done. No one's protested that all of these should be weighted the same, including admin and eval is also weighted the same as these three these preferential ones. So so the two issues left are, should underserved be its own row weighted the same as rural and partnerships, eval and admin? And should project impact and strategies be just like free range from 0 to 25 instead of tiered? If staff, I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants here. I think if staff were to make a recommendation on the spot, so Dwan and Danielle jump in if you disagree, but I think staff would endorse making project impact and strategies free range from 0 to 25 and leaving underserved as its own row weighted the same as these other categories. Is that fair, Dwan, Danielle?
Yes. Go ahead, Kim.
I actually agree with that. I mean, I think that because of the way the legislation is written, I think we shouldn't vary the weighting on rural, underserved, and project evaluation. Despite my concerns about, what does underserved really mean? I think that those three should remain the same. And the idea of free range on project impact, I think is really good. It's a really good way to allow for just kind of a people's ability to make a tighter evaluation. So those are my comments.
Jim, do you want to go next?
Yeah, what I would say, instead of getting rid of those points, I would just say not addressed 0, below expectation is 1 to 15, meets expectation is 16 to 20, exceeds expectation is 20 to 25. And so people know that there's some standardization, but you know that you're flexible within those scoring areas to change the numbers. I think that would avoid your clumping problem.
It's a good idea.
That's a good idea.
I think that's really smart. Yeah, that's great, Jim.
Jennifer, do you want to go next?
Jump in there, Jennifer.
Sure. So coming from a different field, but I think something I've done is grading calibration. So if there were to be multiple teams, one approach to take would be to have the entire group grade, let's say 2 to 3 proposals together to establish parity with all the criteria. And then everyone can go back and grade their own proposals. And the hope would be that the issue of the sliding scale would be less disparate among groups. So just to add to that.
I thought that's what we do on October 19th.
You have described something that we've done. So we're glad to hear that in another field we've been adopting that, doing it correctly.
Okay. So, oh, sorry, Eric.
Yeah, I just want to say that if we, I like that idea on project impact and on underserved. If we interpret underserved in light of the generic guidance that you highlighted earlier, I don't think it's terribly meaningful, but I guess it's not fatal from my perspective. I mean, I just don't, everybody's going to get points and we're just going to have to differentiate effectively on other criterion. So, I mean, I guess I can go along with that.
Tammy.
I support the staff's recommendation to have that broken out, the 3, and then doing the range up above on the project impact. Just a question in terms of the scoring, and would we want to go as high as a 15 on somebody that was below expectation?
That's what I was wondering too, actually. I was looking at it.
Yeah, I don't know if that range needs to change a little bit, but I'm not sure I'd give somebody 15 points if they were below.
Or like it's yeah, up to 15 points or below, and then there's only like 5 points that differentiate the other two, or like the spread within each one is only 5 points. Jim, do you have any thoughts on like move the points around? Do you want to do like one? Would you do 1 to 10 on below?
Well,
11 to 20 on meets, 21 to 25 on exceeds. They wouldn't be the same. They
what are
wouldn't
you,
spread the same.
you suggesting variability for all of them? A range for all
Well,
the scoring?
instead of 15 points for below, a spread of 15 here, a spread of 5 here, and a spread
Oh.
of 5 here, maybe a spread of 10 here, 10 here, 5 here.
Sure. That's
Well, I
fine.
mean, Tammy, were you thinking like up to 15 points is still a below? That seems kind of harsh. That's what I was hearing, or like you're like, we can get all the way up to 15 points and it's still a below expectations or something.
Yeah. I think what you're suggesting can make sense. 1 to 10, 10 to 20, 21 to 25. I mean, again, it's specific points, so they're going to find, somewhere in there. But I guess when you put it next to the word below expectation, 15 points seemed high out of a possible 25.
Okay. I'm gonna just to buy you all time to kind of just like sit with all this. I'm gonna point out something that I is in the memo, but I just didn't come up earlier. These two rows used to be, I just want to make sure I kind of like said it out loud for the record. They used to be focus on rural folks and underserved. HP3 didn't use the statute, didn't use the words focus. HP4 doesn't use the statute doesn't use the word focus. They just say serves. We had focus in there before, and at least one applicant for HP3 did raise the good question of like, might focus not suggest like a greater than 50% sort of concentration of like spending or services or clients or something. And that wasn't in the guidance for HP3. It wasn't how the scoring team interpreted the word focus. They, you could still get like a meets expectations for HP3 for having like a 40%. We didn't really even have them quantify it strictly. So to make it extra clear, we removed the word focus and just used the terminology from the funding statute, which is serves. I just wanted to flag that. That was someone could argue that was a substantive change. So staff's position is that kind of clarifies what the approach was last year in hopes of avoiding confusion this year. Okay. Other thoughts on the scoring rubric?
I'd move that we accept the staff recommendation in the form that it is presently redlined.
Great. We're going to need to, let me go back to the slides and thank you for the motion. Let me draft a revised resolution for you all to see. And I'll welcome all assistants, Dwan and Danielle. So, so 30 approves the Parties Rubric and Issue Plan because as described herein, and then sometimes we'll say except that the rubric will incorporate the, is there a more elegant way to say this on the change edits?
We still see the rubric itself
Oh,
and
sorry.
the track changes.
Thank you, Danielle.
No problem.
There we go. So the resolution was originally approves the priorities rubric distribution plan for the 2023 through 2024 HP competitive grants as described herein. This is normally should be described in staff's August 31, 2022 memo, except, and then we can make the exception that the rubric will incorporate the track change edits. Should I, Dwan, would you recommend I can accept all the changes and copy paste it onto a slide and try and make it part of the resolution, or do you want to incorporate it by reference? Oh, did we lose Dwan?
She might have stepped away. So her camera's off and she's muted. So she may have
That's
stepped away.
totally fine. So the rubric will incorporate. I guess when in doubt, sometimes we'll just copy and paste the rubric into the resolution. Will be. And I will say this is, Jim, correct me if this is wrong. This is our last business item, and we do have 30 minutes. If folks wanted, like Dwan, to step away and grab like a glass of water or something, I'll wordsmith this slide. If you all want to, if you need like a quick break, or you can stay here and watch me do this.
So the rubric is one page, right?
It's like a whole page, yeah. Let's see. Let me see.
Can you just say the attached rubric and then mark it up and attach it?
I just want to make sure that for like the record, the resolution references.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
The attached rubric, and it would be attached.
And I'll just attach it to the memo. So as described in okay, memo except that the will be attached rubric. Let's just remove the rubric from here. Priorities and distribution plan grants description steps, except that the rubric will be the one attached.
Well,
and we'll attach it to the resolution.
Why do you need accept distribution plan?
Oh, I removed the word rubric, so now I can. Well, because the staff's August 31 memo has the original proposal.
Okay.
So except that the rubric will be the one attached, and then attach it to the resolution. What I'll do is to make it extra clear, I'm actually, instead of doing this on a slide, I'm going to do a fresh. I'll have to switch my screen share again. I'm going to do a fresh Word document with the resolution and then the rubric right underneath of it, because I know this passes muster. So let's see. Okay. So. Zero, 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 25 points. Admin serves rules for underserved, project evaluation, partnerships. All the language, 15. Special consideration is going to go away. And I think I can get this all on one page. So so we only have to do this once. Danielle, will you take a really close look at this with me and make sure that I caught all of the changes? I'll just say them out loud too. So what we've done is project impact and strategies still has 4 tiers, but within each tier, they now have a range of points. So 0 for not addressed, 1 to 10 for below, 11 to 20 for meets, and 21 to 25 for exceeds. Admin serves rural, serves underserved, project evaluation and partnerships are all now their own rows. The weighting has stayed the same. So it's 0 to 15 preset points. And just want to make sure that adds up to 100. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is a maximum of 75 points. 25, that's 100. No special consideration. And took the word thoughtful out of rural and underserved. So it's just presents a strategy. Did I miss anything?
No, that is my understanding of the changes as well.
Great. We removed, thank you, Danielle. We removed advocacy. I'm looking over my notes. We removed evidence-based advocacy. It used to be a special consideration category and that row is just gone. We didn't add replicable, but I didn't hear the committee like move in that direction. And I think we're at 100 points. That's all I have in my notes.
It would be an interesting proposal that failed entirely to address project impact and strategies.
To get it not addressed.
But that's fine. To keep
You're
it-
right. We could just gray that one out. It's
Well,
like
no, it's
actually
fine. Keep
it's
it
possible.
at
Maybe it's good that it has a spread of 0 points. Okay, so I'll read it out loud, just not the whole rubric, but just the resolution language at the top. So resolved that the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Homelessness Prevention Funds Committee, acting on behalf of the commission under its delegated authority, approves the priorities and distribution plan for the 2023-2024 homelessness prevention competitive grants as described in staff's August 31, 2022 memo, except that the rubric will be the one attached here.
Reiterate the motion.
Thank you. Was that Eric or was that Rich? That was Rich, right?
No, but in a gesture of great unanimity, I will second Rich's motion.
Thank you, Eric. And then I'll take the vote. Meeker?
Yes.
Bonachet isn't here. Did Amin ever join? No. Iskin?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Yes.
Rhinus?
Yes.
Savage?
Yes.
And Schreiber?
Yes.
Motion carries. We did it. You did it.
Great. I've got a question for you, Chris. What about when are we discussing the membership of the scoring teams?
Great. So this is good use of like the final few minutes. Staff's recommendation would be, for efficiency's sake, Jim, is to let staff work like offline to figure out to take volunteers and figure out availability and assemble a team of, I think staff would propose 3 staff members and 3 commissioners. So it's balanced. It's kind of a big team, but we want it to be balanced. Staff would pitch that it be balanced this time. For HB3, it was 3 staff members and 1 commissioner. If there, so this is the recommendation, and then you can all just tell me what you like or dislike about it. But if we can't get a 3rd volunteer from the committee, because Tammy, you previously volunteered, Jim volunteered. If no one else is available, it is quite a time commitment. We would extend the invitation to the full commission in case there's somebody who doesn't sit on the HB Funds Committee that would like to see the great work.
I was going to volunteer, Chris.
Oh, you were? Yay. Okay,
I've
great.
been meaning to send an email. Sorry about that.
Oh, so that would be, so staff's proposal, Jim, would be 3 staff members, 3 commissioners, you, Tammy, Christian, and we'll work with you to figure out the dates and times.
Great. Well, thanks again to Tammy and to Christian. Appreciate you stepping up.
Yeah, thank you from staff too. Yeah, I think Jim can attest. It's really fulfilling to do it.
And just to point out, we've gotten a legal opinion from Brady that if I were to have recommended that we have 3 commissioners on the committee and 3 staff, that would have been a Bagley Keene situation, but because staff recommended, it's not. So we've been blessed on that.
We were told if we're not careful about how we design the scoring team and who does what, it could be considered like a working group, and then it would be of the committee, and then it would have to be all done in an open meeting. And that was not, I think, the intention of the full commission to have that done in an open meeting.
And since that ends our business, I just want to take a moment to thank Rich and Kim. My understanding, this is their last commission meeting, for all the service that they've done, and give them a chance if you have any last words of wisdom for the committee. We appreciate it.
Go ahead, Kim, if you've got anything to
I have
say?
no last words of wisdom. I think I gave them at the commission meeting and repeated them twice to make sure everyone heard them. It's been a pleasure. It's really important work. Thank you.
I want to echo that. I've sort of, I mentioned to Jim that I hope the words that I mentioned at the top of the last meeting are helpful in the future. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this work. It's encouraged me to continue working with the State Bar in some other fashion in the future. And if not, help out in one way or another. All of you have been exemplary in the work that you do. It's sort of mind-boggling. The quality of the work for the last 11 years has been remarkable. And I sort of wish that the public through Bagley Keene or some other better device could understand how well you perform. It makes the job of serving as a commissioner so much easier, and the public's in good hands with you folks at the helm.
Well, thank you both, and you'll be sorely missed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you both.
And I guess that concludes our meeting for today. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Jim.
you, everybody.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. Take care.